Hello, and welcome to the Dissident Mama Podcast, episode 21. Today, our guest is Michael Sisco. Michael describes himself as an Orthodox Christian, U.S. Army veteran, paleoconservative writer and journalist. He's the creator of Saints Edward Media, which is real news and opinion with a heavy emphasis on truth, peace, and order. This traditionalist news outlet features meaty essays as well as podcast interviews and live streams. He was also the campaign manager for U.S. Senate candidate Lauren Witzke, who won the primary but lost the general to Delaware Democrat incumbent Chris Coons. Welcome, Michael Sisco. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing very good, Dissident Mama. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm very happy you squeezed me in this evening. This was the original night of our interview, and then my kid won a baseball game, and he was supposed to have his playoffs tonight, but then it rained, and you were so kind to squeeze me in tonight because I want to get some of this out, some of the things you're working on before the weekend, because there's some juicy things happening this Saturday, and we'll get to that.
But you weren't expecting your kid to win, were you?
Well, I was, but I didn't think the game would be on the exact night I had scheduled a Michael Sisco interview, but that's how
just be honest. You didn't see him pulling it out. You didn't see him winning.
Oh man, my kids are winners in my eyes all the time. All right, so you're a very busy guy, and I'm glad you squeezed me in. You're kind of a jack of all trades, and I think I know a little bit about you, but I have a feeling that I and my listeners will find out some more about you during this interview. So I like to find out about people's journeys, okay? So, you're kind of on this path that I'm probably aligned on many of the issues on, many of the existential paths as you. And, these aren't popular paths many times. So I like to find out why people are on these paths and, find out what makes them tick and how they decided to go down the narrow path instead of the wide. So let's talk about your political journey first. Were you always a paleocon, or did you start out as a neocon and have a libertarian phase, which seems to be kind of stereotypical? How did you get to where you are now, and how would you describe yourself if my intro about you was at all incorrect?
No, well, I guess I'll start with how I would describe myself. So at heart, I'm definitely like a reactionary. I pretty much reject the Enlightenment and everything that stems from it. So I view the Enlightenment as probably one of the worst political or the manifestation politically of some very bad ideas that came to a culmination in the 20th century. That was our bloodiest century that we really know of in history. But so that pretty much makes me a monarchist, but we don't live in a monarchy. And so when I apply my principles within the current framework that we live in, without being subversive or a revolutionary, really, that to me is best described as paleoconservatism. So that puts me, like Pat Buchanan, Michelle Malkin types, maybe
Paul Gottfried.
Oh, well, I don't know. I haven't actually read anything from him, so I can't
Apparently,
say.
I think he coined the term. He's good at coining terms. I think he coined alt-right as well. But well, okay. So let's.
I thought that was Richard. Wasn't that Richard Spencer?
Well, I think Richard Spencer was riding on Paul Gottfried's coattails at the time, so I'm not sure. They authored a book together, so I think that was around the time where they were like, we need a name for this thing that's happening, and perhaps it was symbiosis that made it happen.
But I definitely was not always conservative, so
okay.
Is that where you were going next?
Yeah, I mean, did you have a leftist phase? I mean, I was a hippie for like 20 years. I mean, was it like, I've seen the dark side. That's kind of how I explain it. That's why I'm so very passionate about telling people about the ills of leftism and feminism is because I've lived it and it sucks. So I kind of I'm like, listen to me because I've been there, done that, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you ever go through any of that, or you were just dabbling on the edges with, you know?
No, I was actually a card-carrying member of the Socialist Party USA.
Whoa.
So yeah.
Wow.
But I grew up as I guess a normie con Republican. That's just my parents were Republican, and
Mhm.
I joined the army kind of as one as that is because I wanted to go kill people in Iraq, and thank God that never actually happened. But I joined during like the George Bush surge.
Mhm. All right, you're frozen, so if you're still talking, hold on 1 second.
For instance, and Freemasonry. And how's my audio?
Well, hold on 1 second. You froze for about 8 seconds, and it came from I will join the army to kill. I wanted to kill Iraqis, and then you came back talking about Freemasonry. I'm like, that apparently was
Okay.
a very important 8 seconds. So can you back
Yeah.
up a little bit?
Sorry. Yeah. So I joined the military. At that point, I was very um, like patriotic, neocon type. I was all about the let's go kill Muslims in the Middle East, and thank God that never actually happened. I didn't end up doing any of that. But later on, uh, actually got married uh, to pretty young, like 21. I started dabbling in some things like such as occultism, witchcraft, Freemason. I actually became a Freemason,
Oh,
and
wow.
coincidentally, around the same time as I'm doing all this, I'm also getting into socialism. Like big coincidence, right?
Huh.
Um, so yeah, I actually joined the my wife at the time, and I joined the Socialist Party. um, and of course, that all kind of I get deployed, and then she cheats on me, leaves me for another guy. Um, married, we get divorced. She marries him, and then of course that begins my journey away from all of the. Let's just say that was a little red pilling. The first breakdown of the feminist thing that was kind of the breakdown of that.
Right.
Um, and just kind of losing everything kind of put me in a position of humility where I lost my family. I actually have kids. They are of course I don't have custody, but they're with her in Nebraska, and she actually apparently cheated on her new husband, and they're divorced now too. So it turns out it wasn't all me, but not that I was all that great. I mean, I was a leftist, and but
Do you get to see your children?
no. So what happened? I actually put out a statement about. I have this is all public, so I don't mind talking about it. Um, I was in sales, so my profession at that time was literally selling cars, and I was very good at it. And so I wasn't active duty; I was National Guard, so I had a civilian job and a military life. And I was ranked at one point 15th on the East Coast as for Subaru sales. But no, when I got divorced, I went into pretty deep depression. Um, I literally couldn't do my job because who wants to buy a car from Mopey, right? So I ended up working at Domino's. That's what I was doing back. This was probably 2012, 2013. And so I couldn't afford my $800 a month child support payments. It just seemed, and I was way behind. And I was pretty young. I was in my 20s. I was, I literally thought I was going to go to jail because I couldn't pay child support. I didn't realize that's not how it works, right? So I was kind of manipulated into basically signing my rights over to the new husband, and she agreed to wipe away all my debt. And I just kind of was also naive enough to think, oh, she's gonna let me see my kids. The last time I've seen or heard from my kids was December 2013.
Oh my gosh, that's heartbreaking. I am so
Yeah.
sorry. And
I mean, so this
yeah.
is, I mean, it's all part of, honestly, I mean, it does suck. And people help me, they send me pictures, and I do actually talk to the legal father at this point, and I'm hoping that by talking to him, maybe he'll, because he still has rights, and I think he pays child support now, which is ironic. But
Wow.
yeah, I'm hoping that that's an avenue.
No, now was this and I didn't hear that last thing you said. I saw your lips moving, but I didn't hear you. So if I talked over you, I'm sorry. Is this the point in time when you came to Orthodoxy? A lot of people
I
have to
I, I
be.
didn't I didn't hear you for like the last 10 seconds.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yep.
It's like the old soul commercial. Can you hear me now? Um, a lot of people come to Orthodoxy when they're kind of at the end of their rope, whether that they're searching just for a church, or they're experiencing some kind of suffering. Was this also the path that opened you up to Orthodoxy, or was that already happening? How did this occur?
Now, this was definitely, I would say this was probably the thing that at least brought me back to Christ, or pursuing Christianity. I definitely don't think I would have been receptive to it, if that makes any sense. So with this was the tail end of the occult stuff, to be honest. So um, the occult stuff, it's all about, my will. How can I affect things for the betterment of what I want, right? Um, Whereas Orthodoxy, the light bulb was like, oh wait, this isn't about my will at all. I'm supposed to be humble, and the way to achieve salvation is to become humble like Christ, like God became man, so that man could become like God, right? But no, my last stop was actually because growing up I was Pentecostal before I left the faith completely for all that crazy stuff, right? um, my last stop was actually the Mormons, and I had no concept of a true church before that. It was just, umbrella. Everybody that's Christian is within this giant umbrella of the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember I started going to the Mormon church because there was some cute girl. So, and, newly divorced. I'm like, yeah, let's go. But, so I check them out, and they considered themselves to be the true church, the restored church. And I read the Book of Mormon, and they're very nice people. I think I was there all in all about 6 months. Um, but I finally read the Pearl of Great Price and the Doctrine and Covenants. So I got to the other scriptures that they have besides just the Book of Mormon. And some may find this ironic considering how often I'm called a racist and a white supremacist and all that. But I get to the Mark of Cain part, right? And it's talking about how if you have darker skin, then that means that you sinned in the previous life, and because they're basically originists. They believe in the predestination, the pre-existence of souls. The Mormons do, and I was like, something's off about this. I was like, I think there is a true church, but I don't think it's these guys.
Right.
And so I decided to start investigating early church history, and that's how I discovered the existence of the Orthodox Church. And I was like, holy moly, they still exist. And and so I started. I guess I should backtrack a little bit. I completely, while I was deployed I was actually in Egypt, but I had a chance to visit the Holy Land, and I went to the Holy Sepulchre, and I went inside Christ's tomb, and obviously that was a profound experience. And I actually was like compelled to venerate things like the stone that Christ's body was prepared on. It was like the most holy feeling I've ever felt, like very distinct and unique. And then so fast forward back to where we are now in the story, and I decide to. I'm at the Great Schism, and I'm like, I got to pick a side here. I'm like, it's obviously the Roman Catholics or the Orthodox. And so I email a Catholic priest, the nearest one to me. I email an Orthodox priest. And I actually never hear from the Roman Catholic priest. And Father Gregory Matthews Green, who many of your listeners may be familiar with, his wife, Frederica Matthews Green, he emails me pretty much immediately and invites me to go meet him. So I meet him the next day. It's a Saturday evening. I remember it was right after or before Vespers. I didn't attend Vespers, but I met him, and he invites me to liturgy the next day. And so I go to liturgy, and I'm not one to say everything's experiential, like all about feelings, but I mean, what I felt during Divine Liturgy was what I felt at the Holy Sepulchre and at the tomb of Christ. And I just put two and two together. I said, this is what I saw in the Holy Land. And I just knew right away that that's where I was going to be, and I never looked back.
And how long were you a catechumen? You know, you hear some people are catechumens for 10 years and take their time, and which is fine. Or was it a fast path for you? Like, this is it, I'm not looking back.
I was a catechumen for just 9 months. I was very zealous. I had always been kind of an obsessive truth seeker and reader. So I was always in a book. My whole I stopped reading books on anything else. It was just constant orthodoxy for 9 months. So I think my priest kind of recognized that. I was one of those hyperdox catechumens before I was actually Orthodox, if that
Right.
that gives you. So.
And when were you chrismated? Do you remember the date? I mean, the month and year?
Yeah, it was actually on the new calendar. I joined Antioch when I first came. The Feast of St. Peter and Paul on June 29th, 2014.
Wow, okay. Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, to people who aren't Orthodox, maybe they think your story sounds a little crazy, but it's kind of run of the mill for Orthodoxy. You know, it's just somebody is truth seeking and loves history and questions and has intellectual curiosity and wants to be, nurtured spiritually with authentic, untouched faith. And, in my opinion, it just leaves you right at the doorsteps of an Orthodox church, because
and I think
other things just fall short.
And it was actually Orthodoxy, I think, that also was kind of the breakdown of my liberal worldview, to be honest.
Yes.
Because I had to, for one, put my trust in in the church as the vessel of truth, the final authority of truth, right? Mm-hmm. So I had to embrace hierarchy, which is completely antithetical to, egalitarianism or liberalism of any form. And I took to the whole, it's like, oh, so these king things aren't so bad, and learning about the Byzantine Empire and then the Russian Empire with the czars. That was really the breakdown of it all, and just accepting the truth in its fullness.
Did you ever go through a libertarian phase politically?
I did not, actually. Okay. Never.
Because that's one of the hard sells for a lot of people who are like me, who did that. That was kind of a stepping stone, was no hierarchy and, all this kind of stuff. But it's interesting. I mean, if you think libertarians believe in, private property and, non-aggression and all this kind of stuff, I mean, those are rules. I mean, those are steadfast, supposedly unbreakable rules. So there is, some kind of authoritarianism. There's an authority, right? And somebody's going to make those rules, so that's kind of a hierarchy. That probably wouldn't be governmental in a libertarian sphere, but you know and then you start tapping into patriarchy and all this kind of stuff. And it's really interesting because I know a lot of people who are kind of coming out of libertarianism and still, they love liberty and freedom, yada yada, but not under that guise of you know free movement of all people and labor across borders and all this kind of stuff. I mean, borders matter because culture matters, and it's just really interesting. So I'm glad you skipped that phase.
Well, I mean, I have recognized there's definitely the libertarian to reactionary
Yeah,
bridge that a lot of people take,
right.
and I understand. I think we all, 'cause even as a liberal, there was always at least there used to be this desire to not have a super intrusive government, right?
Yeah,
But that's gone on the left, obviously. But when I was there was still that element. So I think we share a libertarian ideal in the
yes,
sense that we don't want government overreach. The problem is that they don't understand that there's a paradox with government. Whereas the more centralized there is to an authority, like one person, the the less intrusive the government tends to be, and that's true throughout history.
yeah,
Whereas what we have with well, if you make the government small in the sense that libertarians do, I mean, I just don't see, because every time they try to make an effort towards that, it leads to more of a bureaucracy and the growth of the megastate, which just
right,
becomes ever more intrusive.
right.
So, you
Yeah.
know,
And Paul Gottfried, who I like, but he's coined it to where he calls it the therapeutic managerial state, where it's always giving therapy to people and managing these things. And, we would call that the deep state, at all sorts of different levels. But yeah, and then that becomes the Leviathan, and that's the problem. Well, let me ask you one question about something you mentioned before, and then I want to get into Saints Edward Media, the Enlightenment. A lot of people think they know what that is, but how would you define it? Is it just because it was specifically man centered with God on the fringes? Or was it, I don't know, Freemasonry run amok? How would you just kind of define that, and why is that, kind of counterintuitive to you?
yeah. Well, I know a lot of people will. There were to be fair, I do have to acknowledge that between the 17th and 19th centuries, there were a lot of different ideologies and philosophies that were not the same, and there was a lot of variance of opinion. And like you have, for instance, Carlyle and Nietzsche, they probably wouldn't quite fit what I'm describing. I mean, Nietzsche is not cool, but Carlyle, I like Thomas Carlyle, and I like a lot of Hobbes, for instance. But I think what I'm referencing are the strains of thought that influence like the French Revolution, maybe even like Magna Carta type stuff in England, um, and then the American Revolution. So like Rousseau, and I don't have all these off the top of my head, but yeah, the philosophies that mostly influence the revolutions to throw down the old guard, the old monarchs, and to start the new world here.
Right.
Um, those would be kind of, and yeah, it is very individualistic centered. It's very emphasis on liberty, right? Um,
Hmm.
which is not a true liberty, and equality, which I think is we're starting to see that there is no such thing outside of a Christian context.
I agree.
So it's just the rejection of the classical worldview.
Right.
really.
And this will be a good bridge to Saints Edward Media and why you started. But I think that's one thing that appeals to me about Orthodoxy. It is individualist and collectivist because, if you're sitting there complaining about all sorts of things, where does it all start? With the repentance of you, with work on you, but yet you're part of something that can be even universalist, which that can be scary and put offing to some people, but it truly can be um, an encompassing thing that's beautiful because I think it does incorporate in unique cultures and diverse flavors, and just studying about the saints coming to the Americas and coming in through Alaska and how they appreciated the culture of the Alaskans. They weren't ecumenists at all, but they were like, okay, this is how we're going to relate to these people, learn their language, appreciate their culture, but then tell them how God's always been here. And I find that fascinating with Orthodoxy, and I just don't see um, other people doing that. It's either super collectivist or super individualist, and to me, they're not mutually exclusive. So, Saints Edward Media, what is it? Why did you start it? What's the goal of it? And are you the only person that puts content on there? Because I think you are. And if so, do you ever sleep?
I am not actually. So
Okay.
we have about 15 writers in total. I try and get constant it's always a struggle. I pay them now, but we don't always. Usually, I will write at least once a week. So um, typically, I try to so that we at least put out one article a week when
Yeah.
everybody's slacking. But I don't give them quotas or anything. But I started it because, well, what I value the most politically is peace and order, right? That's what makes me. That's kind of what separates anyone on the reactionary right from the left, which is all about anarchy and chaos. And that's really what the difference between God and Satan, to be honest. So I started it because I didn't think that there was really a site that filled that niche of traditionalism that is there, that it's not strictly Orthodox. There's we have Roman Catholics, and basically trying to build like a traditionalist coalition, not ecumenist. And I'm not an ecumenist, but if you want to accomplish any sort of restoration in our country, you have to work with others. So
Yes.
um, no, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to reintroduce traditional values into our political discourse.
And you have something called a book club that may not necessarily be a book club because you had mentioned it when you interviewed me. And I was like, what is he talking about? So, anyway, I checked it out and I like it. I like it. It's got, I don't know, 25 or 30 points that I think I can all, give a power fist to. And tell us a little bit about that. And then the trad meetups that I see on your Facebook page, is that all kind of the same thing? And what's the goal of all this? And I mean, what are you trying to do with this? Just like build a movement. I mean, put a movement. I mean, because I think the movement's already there. Trad is very underground and cool in underground circles, but I mean, are you just trying to move this ball down the court? Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I obviously noticed. I see a lot of energy with in the trad movement. I kind of see people like the identitarian type stuff seems to be waning, and no energy, nothing happening. You even saw AIM just dissolve. So, um, but I just noticed, there seems to be a lot of pent up energy in the traditionalist movement, but not a lot of direction. Um, so mostly just like I felt the desire to actually get together and meet and do in real life stuff, but nobody was taking the lead on it. So I was like, what the heck, I'll do it. And so we have this book club where all we do is read books. I'm just kidding. um, no, so it has several purposes. I would say three main purposes. One is to coordinate civic engagement. So we're actually going to be encouraging people to run for office on traditionalist platforms. Specifically, most especially local stuff like school boards, mayor, county council. School board's incredibly important because that's where they affect our children, honestly. So that's number one. Number two is, plan B in case all this starts crumbling down. We need to build a community infrastructure, pull our resources together as traditionalist Christians. Make a plan for if this all does come crashing to the ground, the republic as we know it, which I hope, you know, reactionary me is like, yes, let's do it, monarchy. But we know that when it comes crashing down, what is actually waiting is Antifa, right? So we don't have any sort of organization for to enact a Christian monarchy or the new Byzantium. So we basically everything that we're doing is completely legal. It's operate within the framework of our system, civic engagement. Let's run people for office and do what we can to save ourselves within using what we have available to us. And then plan B, let's build community and infrastructure. And plan C is just good fellowship. So, that's the book club for you. And we are having a trad forum in June as well in Indiana. Still waiting, still trying to confirm my my keynote speaker, but tickets are on sale if you want to buy tickets early anyways.
And is that a link I can find on your Saints Edward Media page?
I haven't put it on the website, but it's on Eventbrite, and it's also okay. I think it is on our Facebook page.
Okay. So if there's any kind of trad meetup thing on your Facebook page, I could put that like in the show notes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. And the trad meets are free, but and they're open to anyone that wants to come. They are not necessarily part of the book club, but they are definitely, we're trying to get you to join the book club when you go to those.
Right. Yeah.
So
I see. Yeah. And I mean, I think all those things are great. And I think I'm not sure if we talked about this the other night. I've done a lot of interviews this week, but if there's anything 2020 has done, it is kind of, I say it's pulled the scab off of these kind of nice and very temporary relationships sometimes we had in parishes or in communities or in schools or in even neighborhoods, to let people know that I think it's very stark now who are your people and who are not. And that can be, however you define your people, but it could be, these people want to throw me under the bus and want to, whatever, put me in a mask and shut me up. And these people don't. So these are my people and those people aren't. And I think, this is as great a time as any for, the fellowshipping, because we don't all live very close. You and I don't live very close. Most of the people I interview don't even live in my state, but there are people like us around us. And I mean, it's tapping into that. And I think it's really easy to find those people now because, the rubber's meeting the road here and people are willing to put themselves out there. So I think that's one thing 2020 has done. And then the civic engagement locally, I think is very important, just because sometimes, the federal politics, I'm pretty black-pilled on it, which gives me a good segue into the next thing that you have done. You were the campaign manager, if I'm correct, for Lauren Witzke. She's a fine lady who ran for U.S. Senate. So how did you meet her? Because I've read stories of how you met her, and that sounded kind of just random and how it all came together. So I want to know if that's true. But why U.S. Senate? Why not something else smaller? So how did you meet her? Why did she decide to run for office? And how did you become her campaign manager? I guess those are the big three.
I'm curious. What article did you read? Was it the how
Jared
to
Holt,
fight?
Right Wing Watch, man.
What did it say? How we met?
Just on Facebook, and that y'all just hit it off, and you talked her into running for office through like a
Yeah.
Facebook group or something.
Well, I did meet her on Facebook. But
Which is fine. That's how I met you.
well, I had my podcast going by that point, and it was pretty new, and it was called Hearth and Fire at the time. And I saw that she was doing like these little Trump 2020 tours, which weren't official Trump campaign stuff, but I was a little frustrated with Trump because of the whole Syria stuff, and I was mad, and I was like, he just shot missiles, and so I was like, let's bring this MAGA girl on and just utterly wreck her on my show, right? And we actually met at my friend's studio, so we did it in studio, and she was probably thought it was a bigger deal than it actually was, because at that time I was brand new, maybe 4 episodes in, and I'm ready to just go after her from her right, and she, I think, thought I was like a liberal, and then she sees my MAGA hat, and but no, she ends up telling her story about her drug addiction and her recovery, and why she supported Trump because of the immigration, because of what she experienced with her drug addiction. And I was like, plot twist. This is a little more serious than I thought it would be. And so,
Right.
I didn't quite, I was thrown way off guard. Not quite what I was anticipating. And I actually found myself kind of being, well, she kind of brought me back on the MAGA train a little bit. So we got a little, a budding friendship, you could say. I'll leave it at that. But she goes to Iowa for Trump campaign. She gets a job out there, and I go with her. So I become her team leader on the Trump victory. I was just a volunteer, but I was in a position, being self-employed, that I could do it. So I went, and I kind of viewed it as a way to get my foot in the door with electoral politics. Turned out I was correct, because the way I saw it, I was like, how can I keep playing this long game when we have demographic replacement is gonna ruin it, and in like 20 years, maybe less, won't be able to play the long game anymore. So I should maybe do something about it. So here I am, giving speeches at her MAGA meetups, managing her volunteers, and this congressional candidate saw one of my speeches, and sure enough, I end up on a congressional campaign as a political director. So, I mean, I was also a broker. I wasn't a broker, but I owned a real estate brokerage. So that's kind of where some of my management skills came from, right? Organizing and managing. And realtors are basically just like volunteers, because it's just how they are. They're getting. And so, yeah, I find myself as a political director, and that didn't obviously last because Lauren was planning this immigration forum. I guess, and it initially was going to be a Trump victory event, and she had booked Scott Pressler and Dylan Wheeler educating liberals, the Angel families, and it's this big deal. And Trump victory is like, well, wait a minute. These guys are a little too controversial for you, Scott Pressler and Dylan Wheeler. Well, little do they know, we also arranged for a a surprise speaker, none other than Nicholas J. Fuentes. This is right during the November Groyper Wars. We're all excited about it. We're like, let's help this dude become the new Charlie Kirk. Neither of us quite anticipated the backlash, as I should have knew better, but by this point, Trump victory is like, we don't want to be on this. So we already had the whole thing planned. We're like, so what do we do? So we asked the Scott County Teenage Republicans if they would want to take over the event. So we sat them down, the leader, the president of the club, and we said, hey, look, we booked Nick Fuentes. Do you want, it's your call. We can cancel him or you can keep him. What do you say? And a big old Adam Parcell is this kid. I don't mind throwing him under the bus at this point because just don't care anymore. Adam Parcell, big smile, big grin goes on his face. He's like, let's do it. So the event goes on. My candidate shows up. His primary opponent shows up. The event's great. Nick Fuentes speaks in Bettendorf, Iowa at the Immigration Forum. He gets a rounding ovation from all the boomers. He does a Q&A, and they even clap at the end of the Q&A. They loved him. It wasn't until the next day when the media shitstorm, basically. And I got fired because I just had happened to retweet Nick Fuentes at some point. So Bobby Schilling basically caved to the mob, threw me under the bus, called Nick Fuentes a white supremacist and a racist. And I'm like, well, the teenagers are getting death threats, and I didn't want Lauren to get fired because she was at the event doing Trump stuff. So nobody knew that we were involved in bringing Nick, but I felt like the right thing for me to do would be to take credit for it. So I went to the media. I took credit for inviting Nick Fuentes. Next thing I know, I'm on the front page of the paper in the Quad Cities. Says, Schilling staffer invites far-right speaker. So I am the boogeyman at this point in Iowa. And then Schilling is so mad. He knew that there was a connection with Lauren and I, and so he gets her fired. A couple of weeks. It takes like a week and a half for her to finally get fired, just for being associated with me, basically.
Right.
And so there's like a week where we're trying to figure out what's our next move. Here we are, both in Iowa. We're not from this place. What do we do? And I liked Iowa. I didn't plan to leave. I got my driver's license, so I became an Iowa resident.
Oh.
Yeah. So I can't run for office anywhere, or at least I thought I couldn't. Turns out I probably could have. But Lauren was still a Delaware resident. And so we just basically thought it would be a funny FU and a troll to run her for office. And we initially were thinking U.S. House, but there was a guy running for House, and he begged us to run for Senate instead. His name, Lee Murphy, basically begged us to run for U.S. Senate so that we wouldn't primary him. Which turns out then later his friend would primary us, which stupid. But anyways, so we run for Senate, and basically it initially was supposed to be an epic troll. Let's run on an America First platform with a 10-year moratorium on immigration, right? And I wrote her platform. The only thing she added was the opioid stuff, the federal funding for opioid recovery centers, long-term recovery, so which makes sense. So but she had a good. I knew that it would work in a sense. I knew that it would be a successful campaign to a degree because she had a good narrative. So I crafted her, put her bio up. We were like, we got to put everything out there right from the jump. Let's just make it part of your story, and let's roll. So that's what we did. And I was only on her campaign through the first 6 months, and then I decided to part ways and focus on St. Edward. So
That's an amazing story, and I knew parts of that, but I did not know the whole thing. That is fascinating. So, um, so Nick Fuentes, little old Nick Fuentes, little old Catholic dude in Chicago, is the reason this all came crumbling down. I mean, if that's the case, I mean, is it just because the Republicans at such a the national platform or whatever you call it, that huge kind of DC behemoth, that they're just so neocon and cucked and ridiculous? Or, I mean, come on, of all the people on planet Earth to be scared of Nick Fuentes, that just is silly to me. I mean, if that's the case, you and I are toxic, So,
oh yeah, well, I think Iowa Republicans are. So I think there's nationwide, I would say that there's probably more receptivity to like a paleocon platform, and certainly people took to it in Delaware, and the Republican Party in Delaware was actually pretty better than expected, to be honest. Of course, they endorsed the other candidate, but they never came after us in the way that the Iowa Republicans did, and we beat their endorsed candidate in the primary. But no, the Iowa Republicans are basically liberals.
okay.
Yeah.
Now, does this have, you had mentioned, Charlie Kirk and that kind of thing. Does this have anything to do with kind of that, Dan Crenshaw, neocon, Ben Shapiro Republicanism, the big con? Or is it just people got scared and didn't even know what they were talking about and just pushed you away because it was easier?
I think a little bit of both, honestly. As far as Schilling goes, like my old boss, I think mostly he was scared, because Ben the Ark, which is actually chaired by Alex Soros, they are very big in that region, and they were the ones pulling up my tweets of Nick Fuentes, which weren't even bad tweets. It was just, here I was, big boogeyman, and they were lobbying pretty much every Jewish organization to reach out to Bobby to denounce this white supremacist, Holocaust denier. And I think Bobby just freaked out. He was just afraid, and I don't think he actually did any real digging past the accusations, which is ironic because he always talked about the Republican Party is the party of free speech, right? Well, we saw how that worked out when the mob came after you. So no, I think he just caved. I did write a hit piece on him later, which was on his. So he was like a free when he was first in office. He had been in Congress in Illinois before he moved to Iowa to run for Congress in Iowa. He was like a free trade type of guy, and then ironically he was working for he was a lobbyist for Chinese after he was out of office, and he would facilitate real estate transactions for the Chinese government, basically, because these Chinese companies are all Communist Party.
Right.
So it doesn't, which I didn't know that while I was working for him. I really just saw a conservative with 10 kids, which I was like, based, right? He's very solidly pro-life, so I wanted to save babies. So I didn't do all of I learned a lot of lessons. Like now, before I ever work with somebody, I want to know, if you've held office, I want to see your record. I want to know what you believe on immigration and foreign policy, and So I learned a lot. So I don't just work with anybody now, but
Yeah, and I think that's one of the hard things with being, I guess I would call it a non-leftist. You know, this thing on the right, it's very big. And we all have our different ideas, but you know, that's one thing the left really does stick together. They have this monolithic, you know, ideology that changes all the time, and it doesn't matter. They just keep, you know, conforming to it. And, you know, on the right, whatever that means, you know, I think at the federal level, I just think it's so hard. That's why I think local is really the only way to do it. And I hang out with a lot of people who have been paleocons for like 40 years. You know, they've been fighting this fight forever. You know, I'm all pulling my hair out and at my wits end. And, you know, I've been doing this for 4 years, you know, and I always think, you know, how do y'all, you know, keep going forward? How do you do this? And they're like, you got to purge the neocons and you got to do it local. And they're very anti-Republican, not as in at a local level, but just Washington, D.C., you know, they go back to like, you know, Emmy Bradford getting thrown under the bus during the Reagan administration and all this stuff. Like when we were little kids, like we don't even know about this stuff, but it's been a long time coming. And you have these people who seem to fit the part, but don't, you know, so I think that's why local politics is just easier, because it's so easier to vet people and to know them and to hang out with them face to face. And I don't know. So I just think local is the way to go as far as being civically engaged. But you want to go to Washington, D.C. on Saturday for the Million MAGA March. Why is this important? How are you working within this movement to make it happen? And what's going on Saturday? I mean, should people actually get in their cars and go there? What's going on with that?
I think they should. Mostly, to me, the benefit is it gives morale to Trump to keep fighting what we know to be a fraudulent election. And we have people like Jared Kushner whispering in his ear the ought to concede, right? So Trump needs to see a massive amount of people Saturday, because that's what really, you know, Trump's not perfect, but I do actually think that he loves people and he loves his supporters. And I think that by him seeing us out en masse Saturday, I think will give him the resolve to push him over the top, because I really do think that if he does not concede, that he wins. And so what am I doing for Saturday? I actually have a group of 20 people going with me, because I think it isn't completely risk-free. You know, I think there will be safety in our numbers, and we're expecting at least 1 million people, maybe up to 7 million. But it's good to go in a group because you can look out for each other, have each other's backs a little bit. There will be a counter presence, but I expect to outnumber them. So it's not like Charlottesville where you have to walk in with the, you know, a helmet and goggles and a cup and a shield, right? So, right. And I don't think that would be very optical anyways. So
yeah.
Now I'm counting on there being a massive crowd, and I think it's actually what is weird. You just mentioned all the divisiveness on the right, but it is all hands on deck for this march. We have cringe people like Brandon Straka and Scott Pressler, right? And then we have Nick Fuentes and Alex Jones, and literally everybody is coming out because it's, you know, we know that this is our last shot, honestly. If Trump loses this, we're probably never going to have another conservative president. So no matter our frustrations of the first term, this is all or nothing, and we got to give it everything we got. And you know what? At this point, I will show up with I will go march with freaking Lady MAGA at this point. As cringe as it is, you know. That's not what I believe to be conservatism, right. But you know, my God,
with that on Sunday.
Yeah, if that thing is willing to go slap Antifa around with me on Saturday, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and not only has this whole thing been, just a cluster F and so fraudulent, but I do think Trump is symbolic. He has they have tried to cancel him as far as cancel culture goes since day one. And he he's kind of Teflon in that way. And that's one thing I really like about him. Sometimes I wish he'd go a little harder, but I mean, they tried to impeach the guy, and the intellectual terrorism. I heard somebody use that phrase today, and I'm like, that's we need to replace cancel culture with intellectual terrorism, because that's exactly what it is. Literally telling people things that are made up lies, that are not supported by data, just complete fabrications, and just they have the systemic power, and somehow he gets through it. um, that's a reason to go to DC right there. As far as the intellectual terrorism against you, and maybe some of the stuff against Lauren Witzke, I'd mentioned, like, I read about you on Right Wing Watch earlier, and it's just all the generic platitudes of white nationalist this and anti-Semite that. I mean, how do you deal with that in your own personal life? How are you at your parish? Do you just laugh about it, or has it been scary? Do you feel like you've had people within your personal life that that were possibly going to throw you under the bus?
No, I mean, most people, my experience is most people don't take it all that seriously. I think a lot of it has to do with how I respond, where I do laugh because it's funny.
Yeah.
There's literally no other response. I mean, when I knew yeah, there were nerves like the day that I knew the hit piece was coming, because he tried to interview me, and I argued with him for like a day, just like, you know,
Who's the him? Jared Holt?
uh, yeah, Jared Holt. So, yeah, because he tried to interview me, and he sent me like 10 questions, and all I did was send a statement back about George Soros and globalism, right? So, and then I was just like, you're not going to include my statement, are you? Because you're a coward. And I went back and forth. I bullied him into basically putting the statement in the piece, and he did. And to be fair, he's the only person that ever wrote a hit piece on me that gave me any heads up about it. So I not to give any props to Jared Holt, but it is actually the standard operating procedure. You're supposed to give somebody a heads up, and he
Okay.
actually did it. And but on September 15th, when Lauren won the primary, there was a whole slew of new hit pieces, and
Yeah.
nobody gave me a heads up. I knew they were coming though, because that's just natural. So Will Sommer did a piece on the Daily Beast,
Yeah. I
and how
just,
to fight anti-Semitism. They did another.
yeah. Yeah, it's nuts. I just researched your name and white after it. I didn't even say white nationalist or white supremacist. And in came all the good stuff. It was ridiculous. And it's so generic the way they write. It's crazy. So, all right.
I didn't hear like the last 10 seconds.
Oh, well, I'll repeat it just in case. I was just saying, when I'd read some of the stuff, because we've been in connection, you and I, but I didn't realize, like, the extent to which it had gone, and so I just put your name in a search engine, just followed by white. I didn't even say white nationalist or anything, and it all came, and I was just like, it's like the same thing over and over and over, just like all mainstream news. It's ridiculous. But anyway, it's laughable, and I'm glad that I guess you have a good support system, because if you can laugh at it, that's how you need to do it. So that's really good. Well, I want to end this thing with your West Virginia community. This might be like a whole episode in itself, but just kind of give people a primer. I'll link to the conversation we had where, the live stream where you mentioned it, but basically, I'll give people a little primer, and then you fill in the gaps of having an intentional community that is Christian based in West Virginia, that is traditionalist, orderly, peaceful, and basically just people want to be left alone. How how do people find out about it? How do they get involved with it? Because I think people are thirsting for something like this. It just needs to be done. So give us a little bit more info about it.
Well, I mean, it's very it's in the idea stage at this point, to be honest.
Right.
But
That's all right.
people will find out about it because part of the book club's job is basically going to be to get the word out
Okay.
once we have reached a big enough I guess once it's a full scale operation, we hope to get the word out to people. But just move to West
Yeah.
Virginia. It is to me a prime spot for this because every county went red, by the way, during the election. Not a single county went blue. That's not to say there aren't problems there. There are, but it's also not a gigantic state. So I think that we could, but I think it could fit enough trads,
Yeah.
and it just strikes me as a place that I think that we could do well in local politics and even state politics, and um, not that we're do everything. I think that we can build a legal infrastructure and community for ourselves
Hmm.
within the framework that already exists there. It has good agriculture. It has natural defense like a mountain, So it
Hmm.
is landlocked technically, but works well for the Taliban.
Right. And it could be one of those things that if you plan it too much, it's never going to happen. I think of some of the greatest things I've done in my life. I kind of just did it, and
just
then you figure it
just
out
do
as
it.
you go.
To just move to West Virginia, and then
That's what it's going to be called. Just move to West Virginia.
yeah, which I like to call it Best Virginia.
There
So,
you go.
and why wouldn't you want to live there? I mean, like basically no gun laws.
Mm.
It's open carry. There's no restrictions.
It's not very
I like
expensive.
guns.
Yeah,
It's extreme. You can get like 13 acres for
mhm.
like $65,000. It's insane.
It's
Um,
beautiful.
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people will say, "Oh, but they're poor." Well, they're really not because the cost of living's so low that you don't really need to make. You could literally have like a grocery store job and have a decent living in West Virginia. Like that's the GDP's low, but actual quality of life it's not bad. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, Michael, there's so many more things I want to ask you about, but we'll wrap it up here. Is there anything else you want to tell us or wrap up any loose ends that I didn't get to?
Loose ends. Uh,
Or
no, just
anything, yeah, anything pressing time wise, I've mentioned Saturday, but is there anything else that,
oh,
anything else that's happening like in the next few days?
well, we have the march. I am having a trad meet on in New Jersey, in Hamilton, New Jersey. So you can find the info. I did make if you want to go to that, if you live in New Jersey, send an email to Saints Edward at protonmail.com.
Okay.
Just say, hey, I want to come. But yeah, the trad forum in June 12th. Just visit. Follow me on Telegram is probably the best way to keep up with what's going on,
I
which
don't even
is
know what
at.
that is. Telegram? What the heck is that?
Come on, we gotta get you on Telegram.
I don't even know. I just got on daggone Parlor. I can't keep up with all you young people. You
Parlor
whippersnappers.
is Parlor is terrible.
It is
Doesn't
terrible.
work half the time. There's nothing but MAGA boomers, and Telegram is real where all the real right wingers go.
Well, good. Well, I've been on Gab for
So
a while and I like Gab, but I'm just not on there often. Okay, Telegram. I'll link to
yeah,
your
but
thing
I have a public channel on there. It's at the Michael Sisco. So
there. Okay. All right, I'm taking
pretty.
feverish notes. I hope I get most of this in there.
And
Well,
I'm
awesome.
on Twitter too. I'm on
Good old
Twitter too.
Twitter.
At Michael Cisco SE for Saints Edward. So follow me on. Of course, follow me on YouTube. I'm trying to get to
YouTube.
1,000.
All right.
The YouTube is pretty new, but
Yeah.
follow Saints Edward Media on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much, and I just applaud you for all the stuff you do, and I'm a fan, and God bless you, and stay in touch, and stay safe.
Well, thank you. You as well. Thanks for having me again.
All right, thanks, Michael.